Welcome to Impact, the Conversation, a podcast of the University of Minnesota's Institute on Community Integration that brings you strategies and stories advancing the inclusion of people with disabilities. Our guests are the authors of Impact, our long-running magazine that bridges the research to practice gap with professional and personal reflections on what matters most in disability equity today. I'm your host, Janet Stewart. Where is self-direction headed? About 2 million people today self-direct their Medicaid-funded long-term care services, which essentially means they make their own hiring and firing decisions about the care services and products that help them live their lives in the community. But there's a catch, or a few catches, including strict and confusing regulations that vary widely across the states. Today we're talking with the 3 guest editors for the new Impact issue on self-direction. Julie Bershadsky is Director of Community Living and Employment at the Institute on Community Integration at the University of Minnesota. Marian Fratarola Solina is Executive Director of Values into Action in Media, Pennsylvania, and she's Board Chair of the Alliance for Citizen-Directed Supports. BJ Stasio is an advocate in the New York State Office for People with Developmental Disabilities in Buffalo, New York, and a board member for the Western Region of the Self-Advocacy Association of New York State. Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you here. Yeah, great. So, BJ, I wanted to start with you. Can you just give everyone your thought on what is self-direction? Can you just sort of define it for us to get us started?
The self-direction for me represents the opportunity to take the life's journey that I never really wanted to take, but through the path of self-direction, I've had the opportunity to find out who I am as a person, and it's great to have the staff support that I had to do that, and the continuation of my life journey always continues. I can't wait to see what's around the next corner.
And Marian, what about just from a procedural or a process standpoint? For folks who don't really understand the structure of self-direction, can you just tell us real briefly what it is from a Medicaid HCBS point of view?
It's a policy arrangement that enables people to choose to take responsibility, but also to have the authority over decisions that would otherwise rest with a provider, a community service provider. So I think at its core, it is about freedom, autonomy, and responsibility for taking control.
Great. And Julie, when we set out to do this issue, there were a couple of things that kind of a couple themes kept coming up. There were certainly the growth of self-direction. It has been a popular program. Why do you think it has been as popular as it has been?
I think there are several reasons for it. One is the wider availability of the programs that option itself within, more states, more waiver programs, especially with the onset of COVID. There's also more education. There's also one sort of less positive factor, perhaps, that is driving the increase, potentially driving an increase, and that is the difficulty of finding both staff and the type of living arrangements and service environments that people would actually want in the traditional provider service system.
And here is where we get into why we did this issue. Simon Duffy, a well-known author and advocate in the self-direction field, he's in the UK, wrote a paper one time with the headline, if self-direction, something to the effect of, if self-direction is so great, why is it still so hard? And that is really the issue. We are trying to point out the benefits of self-direction, but also some of the policy and procedural obstacles that are kind of getting in the way of some of those goals. So Julie, can you talk really from a policy standpoint? What are some of the things that in your article you sort of laid out, the three of you kind of laid out as things that we need to think about as a field?
There are so many issues from sort of the policy and the system perspective that come to mind. One, from my perspective, is this challenge that we often talk about people self-directing and the self-direction services, or that model, as sort of being one and uniform, but of course it is not. There is the staffing shortage is crisis level everywhere. That includes the self-direction population. There's no training really that is widely available to folks who choose to self-direct and who choose to direct their staff. There is no support, again, widely available to them. There's so many regulatory rules and hoops to jump through, with often not enough support available to people who choose to self-direct. And that just sort of cascades through all levels and through all systems.
Marian, as a provider of services within the self-direction community, what does that look like from a practical standpoint as you try to provide services in this field?
For us, I think that it's keeping the important thing the priority, right? So it's about the people, and depending upon what a state decides to reissue as a policy mandate, then can really impact how we keep the people as the priority. And for me, my career began really with the advent of the self-determination movement. I was very early on. And so it was always about the values. I mean, one of the first pieces of professional literature I read was the community imperative. And that was really the foundation of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation projects. And so that's what I call upon. How do we not so much return to the values, but keep those values as the priority? As a provider of provider managed services, as well as services that people are directing themselves, it should be each provider's expectation that we know the regulations. And by knowing the regulations, we work with each person to figure out how do we get those regulations to work for them. So I tend to see the regulations less as an obstacle and more of just, okay, so in this changing landscape, how do we keep the people the priority? And that often means revisiting, what does this regulation mean in real life? How is this going to impact the person that's actually dependent upon the funding? Which means we have to help them be compliant.
And how did we get away from self-determination in the first place? Where did that disconnect happen, do you think?
Well, I would leave this to BJ for the kind of as the final authority, but I would say that it's actually the more money, I believe, that has come in, the more regulation. And with more regulation, I think that's the tendency in our field, is the compliance. And so there's those of us who fight to balance that. Of course, we have to be in compliance. If we're going to be good stewards of the public trust, of course. I mean, that goes without question that we need to be concerned about compliance. And really, there's some of us who see the regs really as the basement, not the ceiling. So we can do this, right? But it's how do we simultaneously never, ever, ever compromise for somebody. For us, that means how do we never say no? We don't say no. We say, let's figure out a way to do this and to make it happen. But I think that comes, the price is the more funding you get, the more accountability there is to the structures that fund you, which makes sense. I'm not arguing that. But we've moved away from focusing on the building and sustaining of authentic friendships for people and relationships that don't rely on paid support. For me, it seems foreign to me that we talk about a workforce crisis in self-direction. Okay, well, there can be issues with finding paid staff, but simultaneous, why aren't we helping people to establish friendships, relationships with neighbors, with, people at the coffee shop or at the bar down the street? So I think, again, for us, it comes back to priorities and making sure that the people are always the priority.
BJ, why do you think we lost a bit of self-determination in the self-direction movement?
Well, for me, I think it happens at the most linear level, not only being in receiving services from the system, but advocating for people within the system. I think systems tend to forget, no fault of the system, that different people have different levels of understanding and different ways of communicating. So I think when you're talking about regulatory understanding and understanding how things work, you have to meet people where they're at instead of where you want them to be. Just get to why we can't and how can we make what I need work. And I think that's the exacerbation with families and people served, that the regulation continuously changes based on the demands of what the people want from the system. And it's very hard to keep up with the changes once the demand gets so great. And to meet each person's needs, it has to work with the bandwidth that the system has. And sometimes it doesn't always work out the way we want it to. And speaking for myself, there are times it hasn't, and I have to wait to see how things play out. And I think for me as a person in the system receiving services, the waiting is the toughest thing.
We have a group of authors who are parents of adults living with significant intellectual and other disabilities, and they have all been self-directing for quite a number of years and advocating for this system. And the point in their article, they tell their personal stories. But the point is that oftentimes the system will leave those out who can't articulate their needs in a certain way, and they really make a strong case for not leaving folks with the most significant disabilities out of the self-direction conversation. And that brings us to another pivot point in the issue, some news that we're breaking with this issue of applied self-direction. Kate Murray writes in our issue that early projections for the 2024 data on self-direction show another really big increase in the number of people in our country who are self-directing. They believe it's now right around or a little above 2 million, up from 1.5 million just in the last year's data set. And this was a big increase. Really, it started increasing substantially after COVID. Marion, why was COVID such a catalyst for this?
I think it woke people up to the limitations of program-based services versus person-centered, person-directed. I think that's the simplest way for me to describe it. What we saw all around us were buildings closing, people getting really, really sick from being inside buildings. And we were really grateful at that point that we had never opened a single building, right? So I think the task then is, how do you really, as BJ said, you got to meet each person where they are. And that was difficult during COVID, because for some people, we couldn't have much of a discussion. It was like, we need somebody here in 15 minutes. How are we going to make it happen in the safest way and most respectful way possible? So I think that COVID altered a lot of things. The danger is we're doing some backsliding. And that's hopefully what, this issue hopefully may deter and prevent that, because there's a lot of really good lessons coming directly from people themselves and their family members. And I think the lessons are not just about, oh, this is wonderful. There's a lot of lessons about, oh, wait, we didn't think about things like when a family member is now a paid support staff and the context around that. So there's a lot. We could probably do a whole issue, right, just on that topic. Fraud, people concerned about fraud and people frauding the system. And I hope that those kinds of lessons also extend to the provider community, because there's not a single thing that happens or is happening in self-direction that isn't also happening in the provider agency managed community.
Given that, can you talk a little bit about what you do with the Alliance and some of the initiatives, including the Lives in Progress Collective that DJ writes about in our issue? Can you tell us a little bit about your work with them?
That'd be great. And I know I'll just, proclaim my bias, but besides BJ's, that was probably my favorite article, because the Lives in Progress Collective is really DJ's vision of sustaining in many ways.
This is DJ Savarese, right?
Savarese, thank you. DJ and I co-chair the Alliance board, and the Lives in Progress Collective. Yes, his vision. He won an Arc Tank. I won't call it a contest, but he won an Arc Tank for it being such an innovative idea about being a platform, an accessible platform that enables connection between and among people with disabilities. But more importantly, people. So artists, business owners, or entrepreneurs, scholars, everyday people who identify as being disabled, who are willing to share their stories with other people who are interested in learning more. And so it is an alliance, one of the two major alliance projects. The other project the Alliance is undertaking is the creation of a national supports broker network, where we can bring together people in that critical role. And many people who direct their own services and supports find it necessary to use a supports broker or there's other titles for it, depending upon where you live. But this is really a role that is conflict-free and works alongside at the person's direction to help with employer-related tasks, should be community-facing in a system where most roles face the system, right? And make sure that every component is taken care of so the person can use their public funding responsibly and effectively towards their life outcomes. But the supports broker role is a role that should be embedded in that person's neighborhood and community, and helping them connect to the people and places and things that are important to the person, so that the person develops a larger circle, if you will, of support.
When you say it should be community facing, what does that actually look like? What do you see happening? Like how would that all work?
Well, I mean, I could probably guarantee at this very moment that there's members of our support broker team who are out with somebody or without somebody, but at their direction, finding guitar lessons for somebody who's interested in learning to play the guitar, or maybe it's vetting, a favorite pizza shop to make sure that it really is accessible, right, BJ? They can say it's accessible all they want, but if you got to go in the back door, we don't really consider that being accessible, right? So, it's activities like that are really focused on where are those places And of course that stems from what the person says they're interested in, or using that person-centered plan, which we know a lot. We get to know a lot about a person. A big missing piece of the system is, what do we do with that information? Well, most system roles are looking for those specialized waiver services. A supports broker does not. In fact, we're not permitted to. That's the role of a support coordinator, right? So the broker takes that information and along with the person says, all right, where are we going to start? Where do you want to go? Maybe there's places we never would even think you would like, but we're out and about and we're maybe talking to some people and having some coffee here, and then we're rolling over there, and you're finding your way through your neighbor. I mean, supports brokers have helped people introduce themselves to the neighbors they've lived up the street from for 10 years and never had the opportunity to meet. Think about how sad that is, right? Now, some neighbors, we meet them once and we're like, okay, never want to see that person again. But if we're fortunate enough to live in a community where you do have neighbors, like we watched the game with some neighbors last night, we had a great time. Those are the opportunities that people using services in our system, if they're lucky, they get those kinds of those moments. But we believe that like good service shouldn't be a matter of chance. It should be a choice.
Julie, what's another article that really stood out to you in this issue?
I was struck by one of the articles that was written by a direct support professional who was working in a self-directed space where, they talked about multiple things, including how some of the complexities of the regulations actually had to force that person to say no to somebody who was requesting them to work with them. But then also they talked about how often that direct support professional, that person providing services, providing support, feels like they are the only ones who care about what the person that they're providing supports to actually wants to do and how they want to spend their time and where they want to focus their energies. And that is because it is not reflected in any kind of life plan. And really, how do you get it reflected in the life plan if nobody wants to listen? So that's it was a frustration that came from somebody who was supporting a person self-directing, and that was a powerful story to me that sort of illustrates some of the challenges.
Yes, that was a great personal story by Ellie Sondak. We really only have a few minutes left, so I wanted to ask each of you just for maybe some final thoughts.
The whole training, staff development component, we hear that a lot.
And how do you hear that? Is it people coming in saying there's not enough training, or what is it that's needed in training?
Well, it's actually it's interesting to me. I actually wanted to talk with Julie more about it because she helps me process stuff outside of my own head. But we rarely hear it from people using services, right? Because BJ, I don't know if this is your experience, but people know what they want their staff to know. And what they don't know that they don't know, hopefully they've got a good broker or good, people in their circle that could be like, and hey, what about that? But I don't think that's any different from anybody else. It's we need people in our lives, right? We hear it from family members who I believe in large part we've indoctrinated them to believe that somehow training hours and formal training, just like we've kind of fed them the notion that the bigger your kid's service budget, the better their life is going to be. And I think we're witnessing it doesn't. I've never seen that kind of correlation. You may get more services, but I don't know that your life's really, what you want it to be. But on paper, it looks good. And so again, it goes back to that whole compliance. And I think to what Julie was saying too, you could pull any of us providers, and we'll tell you, we do person-centered planning. Some of us will go as far as to say we provide individualized supports. But when you actually talk to somebody who's accepting supports from that said provider, I'd love to know the percentage of people who go, yeah, I get what I want, when I want it, from who I want it. And more importantly, when I don't want it, you don't make me take it. When I don't know the person coming through my front door, I have the authority to say thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah, this is why you and I do talk a lot. Because this is kind of what I was just jotting down. Like this whole self-direction model, service delivery model, kind of there's two things here. There's the authority piece, which people have the authority to direct their own services, hire staff, full control, right? Like that's what we want. It's a good thing. But then there is the responsibility piece that comes with that, because you are employing people. You are now an employer. So you are responsible as an employer for certain things, like, because you are responsible for somebody's livelihood now as well as an employer. And we do not, I am seeing that we all too often do not provide people the support that they need to fulfill those responsibilities that come with having the authority. Ideally, we should have this whole thing figured out where here's the authority, we'll support you in exercising that authority, and here's the responsibility that comes along with it, and we'll support you with fulfilling that responsibility.
And your direction. I mean, that's the essence of the supports broker role. But states have a way of saying, well, we'll do it this way, but they're not allowed to do that. And then you have some states that don't allow for it, don't have that service written into the waiver, and they'll tell you, we don't need it. We don't have any intention of writing it in. And meanwhile, people are out there like, I need some help. The bottom line is, it's, agencies have HR departments, payroll departments, right? But for some reason, we're afraid to entrust people and their families with the funding. Okay, so we have fiscal intermediaries, but why can't people just have individual budgets? Here's what it is. You have the authority to spend. Here's what you can't spend it. I mean, it really could be a lot simpler. And I'm not saying that doing that wouldn't come with its own set of problems. I mean, that was a lot of what happened during the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation projects, is people did have access to a budget, the use of a fiscal intermediary. And yeah, I'm sure things didn't always go as planned or in compliance, but instead of figuring that out, now we're into these other systems, many states, of course, fee for service. And now we're trying to say, okay, well, this is about freedom and autonomy and control. And the system, the financial side of the system, doesn't understand that language. So we end up spending way too much time, in my opinion, on figuring out the compliance and the billing, claim substantiation, language like that. That why are we even having to say this? Because it can be overly complex, which is why I think brings us full circle to how we started.
I wanted to come back to you, BJ. When you think about, we've just been through this a few months process of gathering writers to talk about self-direction, and you've written your own article as well as the joint lead article for our issue. As you come away from this experience, what is it that you would like for people to know, having come away from this issue? What's the key thing you'd like to, or the key message you'd like to get across to people?
Well, the key message I would like to get across to people is don't be afraid to take the journey. Yes, the journey will be bumpy. Yes, the journey will be rough. Yes, there will be roadblocks. But if you don't take the journey, you might be denying yourself of the greatest opportunity of your life. If not one, many opportunities. And that's what has happened to me. I've taken many journeys I never thought I would take. Many things have happened to me in my life, and without the opportunity to experience things, growth wouldn't have happened for me if I would have stayed in the box the system expected me to. So don't be afraid to take that journey, because the journey belongs to you. Or if you're supporting someone as a family, it belongs to you guys as a family to help your loved one experience that journey for them.
I just wanted to thank all three of you, not only for just being here today, but also for the time and attention and great care you took with putting this issue together. It was a huge learning experience for me, and the people that I met along the way were fantastic. So thank you very much. I really appreciate all of your time and attention to the issue and to the work that you're doing. It's just all three of you are doing some incredible work in this area. So thank you for that. And that's all I had. Thanks for joining the conversation. If you'd like to reproduce all or part of this podcast, please email icipub@umn.edu.
Our show is co-produced at the University of Minnesota's Institute on Community Integration by Impact Managing Editor Janet Stewart and ICI Media Producer Pete McCauley. Skylar Mihailov is our editor. Graphic designers are Connie Burkhart and Sarah Kurtner. For more information on the Institute and all of our products and projects, please visit ici.umn.edu.